Can you light a busy, complex, still life setup that involves lots of reflective elements such as clear liquids, glassware, jewelry, sequins, with just one old ass light? I talk a lot about how I like to keep things simple on set and how I like to minimize the amount of gear and equipment that I use, but I haven't actually shown you just how simple I keep it and that it actually works. If you've watched one of my previous videos, which I'll link in the description below, you'll know how much I love to keep things simple, and that the less gear for me, the better. I did a fashion drink still life shoot a couple of weeks ago, and it's a really great example of how I implemented that idea of keeping very little on set. It really does just make my life easy, especially when there's so many things going on, so many elements to play with. It just means that I can focus on making everything perfect on set, and I have less to faff around with, less to worry about, less moving parts. So with the still life shoot that I did a couple of weeks ago, when I thought about the light setup I wanted to go with, and knowing that I was going to be working with lots of different elements and lots of really shiny reflective items, so I was shooting glassware, I was going to be using clear liquids, so things like Prosecco, champagne, martinis, those kind of things that are simple because I'm no expert at making drinks, and I was obviously doing all the styling myself for this one. I was also using jewelry, and I was using like gold plates and mirrors and just so many things that just throw light around like you wouldn't believe. So when I had a look at all the lights and all the modifiers and bits and pieces that I have to my disposal, I decided to crack out my 15-year-old Redhead light that my dad very kindly passed down to me a while ago, and by the way is dead chuff that I'm still using. So I'm going to show you what it is right here. It's so beautiful. It's so old. It smells amazing. So I'm just going to stick it on here. You can see. It is the original hot light. And when I say hot light, I really do mean that, because my God, are they hot. There are actually some marks here. I don't know if you can see them. Probably not, maybe. Depends if the light hits it right. There you go. The bag that I had obviously comes with some protective gloves, and they haven't been used in a really long time, so I can only imagine that they deteriorated slightly. So when my assistant had the gloves on, he went to touch this barn door just to move it, and the gloves started melting immediately. So that really gives you an indication of just how hot they are, and they are hot the second you turn them on, which is why I'm not going to turn them on and show you now, because I don't have my gloves with me, and they are hot immediately. There is no warm-up. They are just on or off. They're like little pyrotechnics, but they create the most gorgeous light, and I much prefer them over LEDs as well when it comes to continuous light. So normally these guys are great to use as a bounce, or you can fire them straight through a diffusion panel or a diffusion sheet or anything like that. But I love the harshness that you get out of these guys. And what I've decided to do with this shoot is to really utilize these barn doors so that you can really be precise and focus that hot beam straight down onto the product. So just a little bit about the light. It is called a Photonbeam, and it's an 800 watt, and that's what the back looks like. It's super old school, and to be honest, like it's just a cool looking thing to have on set, as well as being a really awesome light that I love. So the shoot was really inspired by my dad's mum's, my nana, and my dad's mum's twin sister, Auntie Jean. I have such nostalgic memories about my nana, my Auntie Jean. They were both beautiful, glamorous women, and particularly my Auntie Jean, she wore these huge, ornate sort of costume pieces of jewelry. Their houses would be full of little trinkets and super old school ornaments and things like that, and they're such vivid memories for me. So when it came to doing a still life shoot as opposed to a shoot that involves people, I wanted to obviously give this a fashion twist and a fashion element. And when I was thinking about, okay, what's the theme going to be, what's the story going to be, I have always been a massive magpie. I'm always so drawn to big, chunky, shiny, reflective gold, ornate, just really lush pieces of jewelry and fabrics and things like that. So the first thing that came to my mind was my nana, my Auntie Jean. So of course it seemed very appropriate to use this super old light that came from my dad. It just felt like it really added to the element of nostalgia, and at the end of the day it felt like a proper old school family collab. So apart from the fact that I only used one light for still life that had lots of tiny little intricate elements going on, you're probably wondering why I decided to use a continuous light instead of flash. Now, when it comes to still life products, drinks in particular, I always opt for continuous light. And I do this for a few reasons. Reason number one is what you see through the lens is, of course, what you get. There's no testing, there's no moving flashes around, and then you don't know what you're going to get until you take the test and you see what the flash is actually going to do. I love that when you're working with elements that are completely inanimate and they're not going to move, there is nothing in that way that's going to change. So, with a model, they're constantly moving and flowing, and they'll change position, they'll move in and out of the light. So you can kind of afford to be a little bit more flexible and see how things are going to hit them as they move as well. But when you're working with things that are not moving, you can really dial things in a lot more. And with that in mind, this is a much faster and more efficient process for me, especially because primarily I am a fashion photographer. I work with people, I work with models. When it comes to still life, I have plenty of experience, but it's still something that I don't do as much. So it's really nice to have that little extra element of control as and when things are happening. So you can start moving the light around and you can really watch in real time how the light is affecting all these little elements. You can see how the shadows are lengthening and shortening and where the flares are landing and how the light is popping in certain areas. The second reason is, of course, while you're shooting, you can also get some motion in there and the light won't change. You're still working with the same light setup and you don't have to completely strip the lights down and start again with flash or vice versa. Now, motion is always something that is in the back of my mind. It's always something that I try and consider on my shoots because it is something that is increasing in demand every year. And I would say 9 times out of 10 when I get a brief through, particularly when it comes to drinks and food and still life, there is always a section in that brief for motion. So the ability to switch between stills and motion super quickly, because of course the other thing that we're dealing with as photographers is the volume of imagery that we have to take in one day. There is much more demand for getting lots more images in one day as opposed to maybe shooting over 2 days or keeping the shot list concise. So it's a really great thing to be able to offer the client while you're taking the stills as well. One of my lovely assistants, Jack Hurry, on the day was very kind enough to take some behind the scenes footage for us. And you can see exactly how the Redhead was being used. You can see how we've really focused that light in using the barn doors. And you can really see that it is just one light that's being shot down at the setup. The only other element that we used to modify the light slightly was a bounce or reflector of some description. I had these like mirror mosaic panels, the sort of thing that you'd make disco balls with. And we used that to kind of reflect and bounce the light, and that created some really nice effects and textures within all the reflective elements like the tray and the velvet fabric and things like that. I also had these mirrored panels that I bought that was intended for the setup itself, which is in this image I'll show you here. But before you peel back the protective coating to reveal the actual mirror, you can use that sort of diffusion effect that it has from that protective coating as an amazing bounce for that hard light to really fill in those shadows. So there was really nothing complicated about this shoot in terms of the setup and the lighting, and as you all know by now, that is the way I like to keep things, and I had a blast on that shoot. All I had to do really was totally focus and concentrate on the set styling, and it's not something that I do very often. I very, very rarely have to do set styling, so this was a little bit of new territory for me, particularly in a still life setup where there's no model. So next time you do a shoot, why not just try using one light? And don't be afraid to use hard light. You can really focus it down with barn doors and you can control it and wrap it with other reflective elements. And these are all things that I just bought off Amazon. These might even be things that you already have in your own home. There's nothing complicated about this. I didn't use any fancy equipment that, is specialized or something that you have to really buy in advance or anything like that. So you can really create some beautiful, beautiful images with a very simple setup. All I would say is, as I will always say to anyone that's thinking of doing a new shoot or a new project, or of course working for a client, is think about the story, because the story will give you the purpose, and the purpose will enable you to know exactly what it is you need to get. It'll enable you to know exactly what is wrong for the set and what is right for the set. And it will keep the series feeling cohesive, and it will keep everything feeling deliberate and making sense and ultimately looking great.